Hi again, everyone. Yeah, so this webinar has live interpretation available. Please choose the language that you would like to listen to. From the interpretation feature below, it looks like a small world icon. And also, if you're listening in English, please choose the English option. Yeah, let's start. Welcome to the Reflections at the Intersections, where we ask the questions that matter when it comes to gender equality and inclusivity in the research space. This webinar series is an initiative of the Gender Equality and Inclusivity Project of the Science Granting Council's initiative, which is currently being implemented by the Human Sciences Research Council, Portia, who are also the hosts of the Gender Summit, and GEII Media Africa, our communications partner. I'm Dr. Lorenza Flux, and I have the pleasure of being today's host for the third episode of the Reflections at the Intersections webinar. Today's session will be an interactive workshop around adopting a gender equality and inclusivity and intersectional lens in monitoring and evaluation for project impact. And today's session will be facilitated by Anne-Marie Brown. She's truly one of the best in the field globally. Anne has more than 2 decades of experience giving technical support with the designing of monitoring and evaluation frameworks and systems, theories of change, learning agenda, and conducting evaluations using mixed methodologies. And has worked with several international development organizations on programs related to gender, diversity, and social inclusion. And we're truly honored to have her facilitating today. Please be aware that this session is being recorded and it will be available on the HSRC YouTube channel. This is also where you can catch up on previous and upcoming dialogues later in the series. To ensure that you don't miss out on upcoming dialogues and other important announcements, I encourage you to sign up for the SGCI GEI quarterly e-newsletter and also stay tuned to our media channels. I'm now going to hand over to Anne to begin the session. Enjoy.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Flux, for such a nice introduction. I was here really nodding and jamming to the lovely music. So I was very happy to hear what the lyrics were saying because I didn't understand anything, but it was so smoothing and it created a nice vibe and introduction. So I'm very, very happy for the energy today. So my name is Anne. The accent is Jamaican, right? But as you perhaps heard already, I have been working internationally in the area that we're speaking about today. So let me share my screen and then we can dive right into it. So today we're speaking about gender equality, inclusion, and intersectionality in monitoring and evaluation frameworks. So what's the plan for today? We have 90 minutes together. And during those 90 minutes, at the end of it, you should be able to explain what these concepts mean. What do we mean by gender equity? What is inclusion and what is intersectionality? And also, after you are able to explain what these concepts mean, you should be able to incorporate these concepts in your monitoring and evaluation frameworks and exercises. So that's the plan for today, 90 minutes. It will not be 90 minutes of me speaking. You will be having a group activity. Later on, I'll tell you what group activity is, just to reinforce some of the learning. So, what is a gender equity and inclusion and intersectional lens? It's a mouthful. I will just say GEII for short. What do we mean by this? So, gender equity, we're just speaking about the fair and just treatment of individuals based on their gender identities. It's not about putting one gender above the other, it's just about fairness and just treatment. and where we address systematic disadvantages and we promote equal opportunities. That's all we mean by gender equity. And what is inclusion? Inclusion is that everybody, regardless of their background, identity, or characteristics, they have access to opportunities, resources, and participation in decision making. So, inclusion is about everyone having a voice and getting access. And then there's intersectionality. And intersectionality recognizes that persons have multiple forms of privileges and identities and oppressions based on their different identities. I'll explain a little bit more. Let me give you a minute to look at this diagram. This diagram represents the situation in the US, right? But I'm sure that it's also applicable in your context as well. So on my screen, I have a wheel. In the middle of the wheel, it's power. So the closer you are to the center of the wheel, the more you are privileged and you have power. Remember, this is the US context now. The more you're located on the outer rims of this wheel, the less power you have and the more marginalized you are. So let me take one of the spokes in the wheel. Let's go with wealth. That one is easy. Wealth. If you're on the outer rim, you're considered as poor. You have less resources. And as you go towards the middle and the center, you are rich and you have more power. And the middle class is in the middle of this wheel, right? Now, persons can have power and can be marginalized not just on their wealth status, but also age, their education level, their mental health, their skin color, their body size. So, taking this wheel, from this wheel in the US, if your skin color is visibly black or brown, you're marginalized. And as you get white, you go inside this wheel, you have more power. There's even citizenship in certain countries. If you are a citizen of the country, you have power. But if you're an undocumented migrant or an asylum seeker, you're marginalized. So you can have power and you can be oppressed across different dimensions. And where the privilege or your identity intersects, that is what we call intersectionality. So you might have a woman. She's already maybe based on gender at the outer part of this wheel. But what if this person identifies as female, is practicing a non Christian religion, is also poor, also has a disability, also of low education, elementary education, is an undocumented asylum seeker, and is unemployed, does not speak the native language? These are all oppression that is double up, right? So when we speak about intersectionality, it's how your different identities converge to create multiple discrimination. You're already discriminated by being disabled, and then on top of it, you identify as female, and on top of it, you're also poor. So this is all that intersectionality is recognizing that women, men, rich, poor, it's not a homogeneous group. That within it, you have multiple layers of discrimination and multiple layers of power. Like even in my case, there are dimensions that I am marginalized, but I also have privilege. Like in my case, holding a European passport gives me privilege, despite the fact that I am an ethnic woman. Okay? So it's a complex issue that we have to take in consideration when we're designing programs or we're doing our research, that women is not a homogeneous group. South Africans, not a homogeneous group. Urban, rural women is not a homogeneous group, right? So why should we bring this type of lens, the gender equality, the inclusion, and the intersectionality? Why should we bring that to our work? As I explained before, once you have this lens, you can ensure that your evaluations, your research papers, your interventions reflect the diverse experiences and address power imbalances. And you can design truly inclusive programs that take into account the different power that persons have and the different vulnerabilities. I always say an African American woman has different challenges than a woman from Jamaica. Yes, they're both of African descent, but it's a unique set of challenges, right? What now are the principles of a GEII informed approach? So, a main principle is participation. If you're going to have true inclusion, you have to be participatory. You have to engage diverse stakeholders, especially from marginalized groups, in your design. From the moment you're coming up with a research question, or a monitoring and evaluation framework, or a concept paper, it's good to consult the persons that you're designing this research for or this intervention for. So participation is key. Who do you speak to? Who is at the table? And also this aggregation. I think a lot of us in this virtual room today were of a research or academic background. And this aggregation is just about how you collect the data and you analyze the data. So have the data disaggregated by gender and other social identities. When we're speaking about inclusion, disaggregate the data based on disability as well and other dimensions from that wheel that I showed earlier. Don't just report on the data aggregated like we reach out to 50 farmers. How many were men? How many were women? How many were disabled? How many from the rural areas? How many from the urban areas? Because once you have the data, you can have more targeted interventions. Another principle of this approach is accountability. And it's not just top down accountability, it's upward accountability as well, because you're accountable to the people that you're serving. You're accountable to the community and marginalized groups. So these are the three core principles: participation, disaggregation, and accountability. Now, this is all nice and abstract, but how does it look like in practice? I can speak about participation, disaggregation, and being accountable. But in practice, it starts with the indicators that you use. So, irrespective of whether the research is on agriculture or health and sanitation or climate change, it's always good to have indicators that measure gender equity and social inclusion. You might ask, and where can I get these indicators? I will tell you shortly where you can look to find these type of indicators. These cross-cutting indicators that no matter what your research or your sector, your intervention or project is on, you have these cross-cutting, transversal gender equality and social inclusion indicators. In practice, you use a variety of mixed methods. So not just relying on quantitative methods like the surveys, but the qualitative methods as well. The interviews, the focus group, the participatory assessments, so that you can have the rich data, you can triangulate and have the rich data to complement the quantitative figures. Because the numbers will tell you how many women were consulted. But it's the qualitative data that will tell you their experience. Maybe these women were consulted or they were part of the meeting, but the qualitative data will tell you about their experience. Maybe it was just tokenism. They were just there, they were just invited to say they were part of the meeting, but their opinions were not taken on board for any decision making, right? And also, when you're analyzing and reporting on information, it's good to come with that gender lens as well in your analysis. The data is disaggregated, but what were the experience of men versus women and also different marginalized groups? And when you're reporting on the information, you present it that way as well. Okay? All right. So let me pause here and just to ask, I'm checking in the chat. Are there any questions or comments on anything that I've said so far? I do want this session to be interactive. All right, I'm looking around. I don't see any hands raised. And I'm looking in the chat and there's nothing in the chat. All right, so.
Sorry, I have a question, but I don't know where to raise my hand. Sorry.
Okay, yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. So I was wondering, because you just said about this participation in collecting needs. And I also always feel a little bit the danger that if you ask like marginalized groups, I mean, the nature of marginalized groups is that they are a minority, so there are not too many representatives of this group. And if they are always asked to be present at certain boards, at certain meetings where they have to represent their group, but then they have this overload of work because they have to be like everywhere because they are the only person expert in this. So how to address this problem?
Okay, all right. And it's a valid question and it is a valid problem. Like we have reporting fatigue, right? And also research fatigue, everyone asking them for data, people requesting attend this meeting and so forth, right? So this does not relieve us from the responsibility to still try and engage. Let me just put that out there. The onus on us as researchers and so forth is still to try and engage these stakeholders and get their participation and their input. I would say, though, if you know that chances are we're maybe going to be going to these persons for 6 different projects, I'm just saying. Maybe from your side, Carolina, you can plan your consultation to make it one sitting so that you can get all the information you need so that you don't have to be asking the stakeholders 6 different times, right? I know you don't have any control of what other researchers do and what other organizations do who may be trying to get the same stakeholder. But from your side, if you know I'm going to be needing 10 things from the stakeholder, plan it in such a way that you get everything you need in one sitting. And also in your communication with the stakeholder, make it clear why you're consulting them and why it is important to hear their voices. And you understand that resources might be thin, they might be understaffed, and so forth, but why it is important that they get a voice. And I do believe these marginalized groups, persons, even when they're stretched, I think just the fact that you reach out and you want to hear from them, right, that they will maybe make time. And what I found useful over the years is I personally try not to just go to persons when I need information to extract. I try as well to give persons an update. What did I do with your feedback? This input you gave me, what did I do with it? If it's to write a report, I share a copy of the final report so that they can see, okay, it wasn't for nothing. And these people just don't come to me when they need information and then I don't see them again, right? Only when they need to extract data. Then they say, okay, my information, this is the end result. It resulted in this publication or in this event that I'm now invited to. And then I can see that, okay, it wasn't a total waste of my time and tokenism. They just talk to me because the donor said they should. Right? I hope that helps, Carolina.
Yeah, very much. Very good point. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on.
Sorry, and there's one more in the chat from Lillian.
Okay. I see Irene. Oh, Oh, Lillian, how best to think about the uniqueness of identities in relation to the wheel? So instead of discrimination being compounding, how to understand if a whole new discrimination experience happens. Exactly. So as I said, this wheel is from the US context. And I use the wheel just to explain intersectionality. But in your context, you might have different marginalized groups, different realities, and different compounding. And I think that that would necessitate maybe a mini research project in your context to find out the uniqueness of identities in your context and to find out if that leads to a whole new discrimination. So my simple answer to that is you just have to do some research for your own context to see what the uniqueness is in relation to discrimination and the power dynamics and the oppression going on. Hope that helps, Lillian. Okay. Irene asks, can I have more details on the disaggregation of collected data? So, for example, let me give you a practical example. Say that you have a program helping scientists, I don't know, to our farmers, and you're collecting data on crop yields, number of farmers helped, number of beneficiaries or rights holders, right? That is aggregated data, but the data you have collected does not tell me how many of these farmers were men or women, how many of these farmers were from the urban area or the rural area. It doesn't tell me who was involved in some of the decision making, right? So this aggregated data is just breaking down the data so I can have a sense of if anyone with disability also benefited, women, the number of women, number of men. I can also have, if it's a region that have ethnic minorities or whomever the marginalized groups are, based on your research and your analysis using that wheel, the data should be broken down in such a way that I can pinpoint exactly how many of these persons were served or benefited from the program or will benefit from the research and so forth. Yeah? Hope this helps. So I have a question coming up now for you will be getting a Mentimeter link. And it's just to ask a question based on everything you have heard so far on what gender equality is and intersectionality and approach. You must be participatory. And Carolina mentioned one challenge already, which is reporting fatigue. Everything that I have mentioned, what are some of the challenges do you think you may encounter if you try to bring gender equality, inclusion, and intersectionality lens to your work? Carolina started by saying, okay, reporting fatigue, but what are some of the challenges to getting this approach? You should have the link to the Mentimeter in your chat. And hopefully, yes, on your screen, you should see a QR code to join, or you can enter the Mentimeter code 3430 5741. And the question is, what are the most significant challenges in integrating GEII lens into your current M&E practices or your current work? Carolina kicked us off with reporting fatigue, persons not wanting to hear, they're constantly consulted. But what are some of the other challenges? All right, so I see some things coming in. And I see challenges could be small group sizes, especially when thinking about intersectional identities. I might probe to get more clarification on that, but let's move on. Lack of knowledge about discrimination. Yes. Data protection, indeed. Uncertainty about who am I missing in the project and should actively seek out. developing indicators, understanding that GEII is not only about increasing numbers. Okay. Access and interest to participate from groups experiencing multiple levels of marginalization. Okay. All right. Do I have a brave soul that would like to unmute and just to speak a little bit more on any of the things presented in the Mentimeter? It doesn't have to be your challenge, but if you feel free to unmute and speak on any of the challenges listed here.
I think Carolina is the bravest soul in the room. Please go for it.
Sorry, that's me again. I just think that, for example, data protection and also small group size, this is so, I think it's so hard. For example, I come from Germany. And then, for example, if you want to say, okay, how many people with migratory background are there? And then you would maybe ask, okay, did your parents migrate? Do you really want to know where they are from? Do you not want to know religion? So how far can you go until you other the people? And then it's like, oh yeah, you're a migrant and you're a Muslim and maybe your father was black. This is a category we are creating. So it's like a very thin layer between trying to be integrative and discriminatory, actually. I mean, in Germany, we had the experience already where a lot of data was collected and people were categorized. So this is a very big question mark still here.
And thank you for raising that very important point, because I faced it. Like, I'm currently living in the Netherlands and I faced that as well. I was working with a non-profit organization and we were working on this questionnaire for users or partners. And on it didn't have anything to do with sex or ethnic background. And I was like, why? Because coming from Jamaica, it's important when I was speaking about the disaggregation, right? You want to know person's sex or gender and their background, because it's good to serve them if you know who they are. And my Dutch colleagues said to me, here it's discrimination. We never ask people about their ethnic background or their religion. That's discrimination, right? Oh no, that's not allowed, right? So I do get you, Carolina. I do get you, right? And I got a lot of pushback, but I was like, but if we don't know who our partners are, we don't know if we're truly serving persons and reaching the unrepresented. If we just have one category, Dutch or other, who is other? So if I'm not Dutch, how do I self-identify? Who's other? I want to know, you know? So it's, I think we have to be guided as well by what the company policy is, but also a little bit of education to explain why we need the data and what we're going to do with the data. It's not to discriminate, it's so we can better target to see who is underrepresented, who's being underserved, and target better. So that's how I would explain it. And when I explain to my Dutch colleagues, they compromise a bit. They're like, all right, we'll ask for sex. We're not going to ask for ethnic background, but maybe we can put, what's your nationality? And that's the closest we can get to asking persons about their ethnicity. So fair enough, yeah? So, yeah, and I see in the comments here, I agree with Caroline, as researchers, we tend to categorize and label, although for good intentions. And we can label, we just have to explain why we're labeling, why we're disaggregating the data, why we're asking. Because we want to target and reach persons and to see how our programs are being designed to have. If we don't know how many people with disability in our program, that's not good. We should know exactly how many people with disability and what type of disability, so that we know, let's have Braille. If we're producing a research paper, let's do it in Braille because half of our population have are visually impaired or something like that, right? Well, thank you, Caroline. A great point. Developing indicators. Anyone want to comment on this? What is some of the challenge in developing indicators? I have no takers. All right. Developing indicators shouldn't be so much of a challenge because I will share where you can get indicators
Yeah.
for inspiration.
Sorry, Ian, there was a hand from Lynn, I think, on the developing indicators question.
Okay, all right. Lynn, go ahead.
Thanks, Anne. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to link developing indicators to understanding that GEI is not only about numbers. So, because understanding that we need indicators that measure the quality, that we measure changes in attitudes and practices, and also understanding that that too is valid monitoring and evaluation approaches. And within our environments is a strong focus on the quantitative indicators and measures, and that's kind of not enough. Just that comment.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. And it is something not just in academic circles. A lot of donors as well, they prioritize objective data. And objective data for them is numbers and quantitative. However, if we're truly going to be inclusive, there's a place for qualitative data. So I advocate for mixed methods. So not necessarily replacing quantitative with qualitative data or vice versa, but mixed. So you have the qualitative data to complement the numbers. So you satisfy the persons who want objective quantitative data, but you complement it with the qualitative data from your focus group or your in-depth interviews, because that will tell you the depth of experience that no number can ever give you. So thanks for that important point, Lynn. Okay, so I'm going to move on back to my presentation. Thank you to everyone who participated. And there are overlaps with some of what is in my presentation, because some of the challenges that you came up with, I also had as well. And data concerns, right? That sometimes you just don't have access to disaggregated data to have your analysis, that some of the research or the primary data that was collected does not tell you how many women, how many persons with disabilities, how many persons from the urban or the rural area, how many persons from a non-literate background. So if you don't have access to this type of disaggregated data, it does impede your ability to have the intersectionality lens and the gender equity lens, right? And sometimes, even when you have the disaggregated data, it can be overwhelming and challenging to make sense of all this data. Carolina spoke earlier of how far back do you dig? How far back do you go? Okay, your parents were migrants. What were their ethnicity? When did they arrive here? So how far do you go? Right? So it can get overwhelming and complex. There's also limited capacity, that some of the staff that you're working with or colleagues may not even know about the importance of gender equity and intersectionality and inclusion. So there's sometimes limited capacity, so we can train staff to bring up the levels. There's sometimes stakeholder resistance. And this could be, I spoke of my own example wherein I was told by my Dutch colleagues that it's discrimination to ask persons about their ethnicity. And also, there are some persons who think the project is not about gender. So why are you bringing gender equity into this? This is a water and sanitation project. This is a climate change project. Why a gender lens? Why everything gender has to be in it? And my argument is any research project intervention that deals with humans You need a gender and social inclusion lens because your project will affect men and women differently, different groups differently. So you need to have considerations for it. Then you also have the cultural sensitivity, going back to the Dutch example, wherein here we don't talk. I know in certain contexts, you can't even use the word sex. It's value laden. You can't say sex to mean man or woman or how you identify. So there might be resistance as well to sensitive topics when discussing gender and power and gender roles. So, what are some of the tips for having a participatory approach? Because that is one way, it's a consultation with marginalized groups. And it's good to have community engagement. I spoke earlier about not just extracting data when you want your primary data and you just take data, but also going back to the community and treating them as active participants, not just passive subjects that you take information from. But how did you use the data? What was the end result or the end product of the data? Have feedback mechanisms as well. Go back to persons, ask them, is this piece of research, this intervention, is it serving your needs? If not, how can we adjust it? It's like you have your hypotheses of what you think will work, but in reality, if it's not working, check in and change it. You don't have to keep going the same way if it's not working for persons. And it's about empowerment as well, that marginalized groups are not just there as tokenism, but they actually have a say in the decision making and they can advocate for their own interests. So this is why even a marginalized group that have been called to 50 different places don't have the capacity to attend all meetings. They will make space for ones that they see they're not just contacting me to tick a box. My voice actually means something, right? I was speaking earlier, where can you find these indicators? You will get a copy of my presentation, and each of these, you click it, it goes to a link. These links click to a website or a resource that you can have ready-made indicators based on the type of research or project that you have. Some of the indicators you can copy and paste. Others you can be inspired to retrofit it to match your own context. So a list of 8 places that you can go. There's even a gender data portal, which has indicators across various themes and sectors. So you can just click and go and see what they have. Okay. Now it's time for group work. But before that, any questions before we go into our breakout room activity?
I have a question, and I'm wondering, and I've actually just started to type it. Do you always need to start a project with a gender analysis? Because that's where you find out. Sorry for the background noise. That's always, where you find out which categories are important, who are the people that you might be missing in designing a project. And is it even always possible to start with a gender analysis? Yeah. You can maybe take us through that.
Yes, great point, Dr. Flux, right? I'm very happy that you mentioned that indeed it's good to start with a gender analysis. Now, what is a gender analysis? A gender analysis is just simply looking at how your planned research project intervention can affect women and men differently. What are the current gender power imbalances, the cultural norms, gender norms? So, a gender analysis is just looking at that and relating it to your planned research project or intervention, right? You can conduct a gender analysis just by doing a desk review, see what exists. You can have interviews, stakeholder consultations. You can look at the literature, what the literature is saying. So if your research is about increasing the employability of women. Look, do a review of how many women are currently employed, how many are unemployed, what's the gender roles, what type of employment is acceptable for women to be in. So that is a gender analysis. You can do a light gender analysis, or you can go way comprehensive depending on your resources, right? Light, as I said, just review, few consultation, and you don't have to do primary data collection from start for gender analysis. You have the resources to do that, you can, but if not, just read some publication on what's there. And then based on that, you can design your program. So thank you for mentioning that. Indeed, that's a very important first step. Conducting the gender analysis, and then you take it from there. Okay. All right. So I'm looking into the chat. Either I am being very clear, so there are no questions, or I've totally lost you. But anyway, we'll find out after the group work. So what is the group work? I'm going to share my screen and explain what it is before you get the link. So you're going to have around 15 minutes. You're going to go in groups, and you can select which group you want to go in. We try not to have more than 10 persons in a group. But what are you going in the group to do? You'll have a hypothetical case study, and you're to read the case study and answer 2 questions. So let me share my screen. Don't worry, you'll get the link soon, but not yet. You'll get the link to this case study, and I have put a link to my PowerPoint presentation, just in case you want to think, oh, what are the principles of a gender analysis, not gender, a gender approach. You can go back and look at my PowerPoint, participatory, inclusive, and what the wheel is, and so forth. Just to consult, if you want, you can click, and my PowerPoint is there. So this is the case study. You are to read it and then discuss in your group the answers to these 2 questions. What are the gaps in the current evaluation approach in the case study? And how could you bring a GEII lens to the evaluation? That's it. That's it in your group. It's just this case study and to discuss and answer these 2 questions. Ideally, I would like if you select one person just to present back your results in plenary. I have it written here in French. It's the same case study in French under here, and also in Portuguese. Good. Any questions before we go into the breakout room? Yes, so the link to the document is now in the chat. You can choose which breakout group you go to. I think one will be English, one will be French. If there's too many people, you will be reassigned. But any questions before we go? Okay, there's none. So you have 15 minutes, 1-5. Then we reconvene in plenary. See you shortly. All right, I think we're all back in. Lillian, I'm putting you on spot. Your group was so dynamic and active. Are you the one presenting for your group?
I am, yes. I'm blessed with good internet in my office, so I will speak.
Okay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
That's because you're welcome.
I'm plugged into the mainframe. Really good active discussion in the group, and I'm really pleased that people were able to engage in the comments as well. There are a couple of spaces where I think I'm kind of going to emerge a little bit of gaps that were noticed, and then some suggestions that the group made around how to fill those gaps. So the first was quite low-hanging fruit, that there is no demographic data that's being collected in a quantitative manner. So any improvements on that would be beneficial, I think, from both the survey itself, but also within the interview pieces, and then also the analysis of the actual kind of crop yield data as well. With that in mind, there's a really good point that was being discussed at the end around how I think it was maybe both Florence and Avi, or Avi, I'm sorry, I can't remember the pronunciation, who were talking about the fact that the farming community doesn't look like it's been empowered or engaged in the design of this. So whether or not the actual survey itself has been designed by them and with them, so that the questions are asked in the right way, the language is correct, it's going to the right person on each of the farming communities. You know, is it the person who owns the farm who needs to answer it, or is it the someone who's boots on the ground actually doing the kind of work and that side of things? So there's a bit of a gap there that seems to be in place, and there's some really good suggestions, of kind of that piece. And with that, asking that community, what now, what next, what does ongoing participation look like, how is this authentic engagement beyond just here's some training, here's some technology, here's a survey, which is kind of how it read a little bit there. So that was kind of some of the main points in that aspect. The other bit was really thinking about the qualitative stuff. So the survey is one thing, and the interviews seem to be in depth, but they've specifically chosen just kind of these ministry experts for the in-depth interviews. And actually, I think the group were quite in agreement that maybe the actual farming community would have been the better space for these in-depth interviews to really understand the impact of the training and the sustainable farming techniques and technology that's been mentioned, and whether or not that was the reason why crop yield data increased, or whether it was something else. We spoke about how how diverse farming communities are based on whether or not it's that being age. So some people were talking about experiences of different age groups being particularly involved in the farming communities. Again, people, different demographics being involved in different layers of the farming community, whether that's being directly maybe with working with animals versus more administration, that kind of thing. And then also thinking about whether or not there's socioeconomic gaps as to how a farming community could take on new training or technology. There's always that question where maybe someone's coming with what they think is a solution, and it turns out that thing doesn't work for you because you haven't got the groundwork in place already, or you actually look at it and go, I know a much better use for that technology that you're giving me that's not going to be impacting your research, but it's something else, and you haven't heard us say why we want to do that. So those are kind of the things that were being discussed there in terms of like the kind of engagement and the usefulness of the overall approach. But yeah, I think that's probably, I'm thinking and just double checking my notes, I think that's a summary of what was being discussed mostly. So yeah, more better information and more better engagement, I think, was the summary there.
Wow. Applause to this group. I mean, you covered all the points. And the biggest takeaway for me is it starts from design. If you are waiting until you're midway or implementing or at the end to try and bring these gender inclusive and intersectionality lens, it's too late. So I'm very happy that you guys zoomed in on that it begins at design and it's about empowerment. So thank you to this group. Very well done. You captured, I think, all the points. And so there will maybe be some overlaps with other groups, but thank you guys so very much. Big round of applause to that group. Thank you. All right. So the French speaking group, who is speaking on your behalf?
Okay. Bon après-midi à tous.
So, good afternoon, everybody. So, please let me tell you what we spoke about in the French-speaking group. Can you guys hear me well, loud and clear? Yes. All right. Fantastic. So I think that the first couple gaps that we observed from the case study that was presented is the one that Lillian has also mentioned, which is the design of the project. There's a big gap there. We have to also, think about all the stakeholders that were not spoken to, the design of and incorporation of those groups, the evaluation as well. And in the end, I think in terms of data collection, we can observe that there is also the people that have been interviewed do not represent necessarily the entirety of all these categories of different people that exist in this sector or these activities that are concerned. Now, we can also note that they did not categorize the people that were interviewed. They did not put them in a certain category or identify them in a certain way. Are they young? Are they women? Are they old? Are they it's a whole bunch of different people that participate in these agricultural activities, and these point of views were not really mentioned or collected or noted. So it's difficult to evaluate what doesn't exist, if that makes any sense. And that makes the evaluation itself quite difficult. We took these elements into account. I think that we could maybe have results that would be more interesting with regards to evaluation if those things were taken into account. Now, secondly, I think with regards to the recommendations from our group is that we should maybe target the different gender categories that are taking part in these activities through this project. We should interview these different genders and people to see what are their different perspectives, what are their experiences, what are their needs, because everybody has different needs, and through that as well, we could have elaborated on better tools or evaluating tools to get better results that would have been much more interesting. And so that's a little bit of a summary of the discussion that we had in the French group. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to the interpreter for fantastic translation. I could follow everything. So thank you to the interpreter as well, and to the French speaking group. And definitely you caught on some of the issues that the first group had mentioned. And what stood out to me was that you felt that certain categories were missed out. So you're wondering about, okay, how comprehensive this evaluation actually is. And I liked that you came with some solid recommendations, right? Like to target the different gender categories, interview the different genders, and to get a more balanced reporting. So my takeaway, the first group, I zoomed in on the design, that you have to have participation from the design. And from the French speaking group, that it's very important when it comes to reporting that you also report in a way that you can see how the project had different results for the different categories, the different marginalized group. So a gender equality, inclusion, and intersectionality lens starts from design, and it goes to the collection of data, the analysis of data, and right to the end on how you report on the findings. Thank you so much to the French speaking group. Last group, you're up. We have anyone from the last group?
Faith. Not sure. I think in our group we also had similar answers like the first group, and we said that we identified our major gaps that we saw was that they failed to conduct a gender analysis to find out which were the target groups in that project in terms of age, gender, demographic, and all that. So that was missing in that analysis. And now to them, we identified some better ways that they could integrate gender lens into the evaluation. And one of them was that we needed to have done proper stakeholder engagement with the team, so that they can approach different groups and have their views. And also in the analysis of their data, they needed to analyze the data to find out the impact to a variety of the groups that were involved in the project, which we felt that was also missing. And then the team from the Ministry of Lands and Agriculture, we needed to know which group was that. They just said professionals from the Ministry of Lands. Was also, we needed to know which team was that was conducting. Did they have an agenda approach to that? Yeah, so those are just some of the other ways that we thought were better ways to integrate the GE lens. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is it Faith?
Yes,
Was it?
yes,
Okay,
Faith.
thank you so much, Faith, for presenting for your group. And as you rightly said, several overlaps with what was presented before, which is good. That means that we are all on the same page. And thank you so much for the recommendations. So thanks to all the groups for the rich discussion. It really, once again, aligns with my presentation. So from my analysis, the whole approach to, well, from design and data collection, and there wasn't much stakeholder engagement or participatory approach, and only expert interviews were conducted. They didn't seek to interview the farmers, and all the groups caught this and flagged this. And the data wasn't disaggregated. It wasn't, you couldn't get any insights on the gender categories or if there was anyone with disability or their socioeconomic status, right? And even how the data or the results are reported, it's just focusing on aggregate data without getting into the demographics or the gender groups, how many were women, how many marginalized farmers were benefited or were excluded, and the indicators that they used, indicators like just crop yields and productivity. They didn't even go into were there any barriers faced by specific groups of farmers or what were their experiences. So even indicators could have been better, not just looking at crop yields, but some qualitative indicators as well, and what were the barriers, right? And we didn't see anything about a little gender analysis being done anywhere. So all of this really aligns with what I had spotted in this hypothetical case study. So well done, guys. You did well. I am right at the end of my presentation today. However, I want you to reflect on this question. And based on everything that you have heard and learned today, what is one thing that you will be doing differently or taking on board? You will see in the chat a link to another Mentimeter, and it's anonymous. So I'm not going to call on anyone, but just to write maybe what is one actionable step you will take to integrate more of a gender inclusion and intersectionality lens in your work? And I had M&E practices here, monitoring evaluation practices, but it could just be your work or your approach or anything. So the link is in the chat. All right, I see one response coming in. Ensure I've engaged with communities before, good one, before designing M&E so that I ask the questions they care about in a disaggregated way. It's a very nice step to take. And check how participatory approach can be put in practice. Yes, good one. And actively consider how to engage more people so that the project is relevant from design and throughout the process. And it's the right type of people, not the usual suspects from the ministry, the experts from the ministry, but, all levels of stakeholders. If I could be helped to remove this QR code from my field of vision, thank you. Thank you. So someone says, I really liked the power wheel. It helped to better understand the multiple layers of intersectionality when considering monitoring and evaluation practices. Yes, I quite like the power wheel, and it would be interesting to maybe do a power wheel for your own context. Because this one was for the US, and in Jamaica, the power wheel would look differently. In Jamaica, we would have one for mode of transportation. It's a fact. If you own a car, you have privilege versus who rely on public transportation or their feet to bring them about. You know, you're discriminated if you don't have a car and you have limited access to certain events and things. So, yes, that's a good idea to use a power wheel. I see, make sure we carry the GEII lens through to the analysis of the data, great one, and also reporting, and engaging the community from design. Yeah. And have all stakeholders engaged right from the start and not just in the middle. All right, guys, keep them coming because we can share these Mentimeter links so you can see what your colleagues have written. But thank you so much for sharing and being frank. And you have the PowerPoint presentation so you can go over and look again. This is just 90 minutes. I don't expect experts after 90 minutes, but hopefully I would have piqued your interest on the topic to go and learn more about bringing the gender lens to everything that you do. That's it from me. I hand over to my host. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. And before we thank you, can we go back to the power wheel? Like, what is the process of constructing that wheel, for example? So if we want to, you know, like you said, this one is based on the US context. So do you sort of work on a wheel based on the project that you're planning, or do you like, yeah, what's the process around it? And I know it links back to my previous comment around the gender analysis. And I'm not too sure how much it diverts from the M&E conversation, but I do think it's an important thing for people to get.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and you partly answered it. As part of your gender analysis or your contextual analysis that you would do before you design a project or research, your gender analysis would pick up on what are some of the inequalities, what are some of the barriers to access, what are some of the issues that marginalized groups are facing, and you do your desk research as well. Who are some of the groups? I mean, there are usual suspects: persons with disabilities, women, the poor, persons in rural areas, young people, the elderly. You know, they're just the usual suspects of marginalized groups. But maybe in your setting, you might have a ethnic minority that you can put in there based on your desk review and your own knowledge. And you consult with persons, and then more information will emerge. If it's a project dealing with teenage pregnancy, then of course, teenage mothers would be part of your power wheel. So I believe do not reinvent the wheel. Use the one for the US context to begin with. Take out maybe what's not so relevant to your context. Triangulate that with your own gender analysis, your own contextual analysis, and your own interviews, and then you come up with a wheel for your context.
Great, thanks so much. Are there any burning questions before we close? Let's just check on that. Not seeing any hands. Right. Thank you everybody for your insightful questions, your participation. I want to express my thanks to Anne for valuable input and significant contributions to this conversation. And I hope it's not the last time that we partner with you. There's a link to an evaluation form. You can find that in the chat. Please take some time to provide us with your valuable feedback. Our next Reflections at the Intersections webinar is scheduled for next year, so please keep an eye out on our e-newsletter and our social media for more information. And also remember to sign up for the newsletter to stay updated on future events, and you can find the link in the chat box as well. And for those who missed any part of this webinar, especially in the beginning, or you wish to revisit it, or you wish to share it with a colleague, a recording will be uploaded on the HSRC YouTube channel. In addition, a summary of this webinar will also be available on the HSRC website. And once again, thank you all for your participation, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next Reflections at the Intersections webinar. Goodbye for now.